Welcome to the Nobody Listens podcast. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Ruven. This is the first episode of this podcast. We really don't have much of an idea of how it's gonna turn out. The only thing we have figured out is the concept of the podcast, but not when it will come out, how often it will come out. So, for our first episode, we originally wanted to watch Fury Road, which is the Mad Max movie from a few years back. But since Maddie couldn't get a hold of it yet, we instead decided to watch something we could both watch and we both have seen before, which is the Monty Python movie Life of Brian, which came out in 1979. And I rewatched it a few months back with a friend of mine who actually didn't see it before. Maddie, who other than me, not other than me, different from me, how do you say? Actually is from the same country as the Pythons, watched it yesterday.
You'd say unlike me.
Thank you. Unlike me is actually a British
Well, I've
person.
seen it about 6 times, but I rewatched it last night.
I think I've seen it around 6 times as well. And the last time I rewatched it was, as I said, with a friend who hadn't seen it before, a few months back. So the reason we decided to watch this movie is that there is actually a lot of stuff in it to talk about concerning politics and such. It's a comedy movie, but it's not purely a comedy movie. If you haven't seen it before and don't want to get anything spoiled, just quit this podcast now, watch the movie and come back later, because we don't really know what we will spoil. We will spoil a lot of the gags and we will spoil the ending. Because the ending really needs to be talked about. So you rewatched it last night. You said you hadn't seen it in a while.
That is
Is this the first time
true.
watching it as an adult person or not? I feel watching this movie as a kid and then watching this movie when you actually...
Yeah.
I mean, not mature, but as mature as we are. Because we're still very childish.
I mean, there are things that when you're watching it a bit later on in life, you will perhaps pick up on or start to analyze that would have just gone over your head before.
And I think that is true for most of the Python stuff, actually, because I don't think that they are purely a comedy troupe. They do a bit more than just plain being funny. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, which we will also address later.
Yep, so what I find is that on some of the more political side of things and the messages they're trying to put across, you're more likely to understand all of those when rewatching it later in life, but also there are moments where you kind of pick up on more when you think, hang on, that was kind of a shitty joke.
You mean that when you aren't as mature yet, you will just have a lower threshold of what you consider funny?
Yes,
And
maybe not be as affected by it or as inclined to analyze it from a perspective on the problems with it, really.
Are you talking purely comedical or also political right now?
A bit of both.
I think we will mostly stick with the political side of things, because talking about what's
Okay.
funny and what's not funny is mostly just spoiling jokes.
Well-
Although I think we will, maybe we will get into some of the comedic stuff later on.
Well, yes, but then again, there's the politics of humor, of course. And when does
Can you
something go too
introduce
far?
the audience a bit to what you mean by the politics of humor?
So, regarding when is something free speech and art, and when is it going too far as to cause social problems?
And of course,
Where
humor
do we draw
is
the line?
related to society.
Yes.
Humor reflects society a lot. So saying it's just a joke is not respecting jokes, basically.
No,
Because
and it's never a good defense.
Jokes, if someone defends a Joker by saying, well, it's just a joke, I think they're actually disrespecting the Joker.
Yes.
As in the person who tells the joke, not in, the Batman villain.
And
I
sometimes,
didn't realize I was referring to that, by the way, because you can hear it. It's not my first language,
yes,
so
sometimes I honestly think when people joke about certain subject matters and then get angry when people find it problematic or unfunny, there's a bit of an issue with that.
should we address the elephant in the room already before we actually talk about the religious side of the movie? Which I think most of the people who clicked here to hear two people discuss Life of Brian are here for the religious side of things, and we decided to watch the movie for a completely different reason, which is the political side
I'm
of
just
things.
waiting for all the responses that we ruined the movie.
I think there are gonna be some of those. But I don't want to ruin the movie for you. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, probably my favorite comedy movie, but it's still problematic. Which doesn't mean it's a bad movie. Everything can be considered problematic.
You said it right this
But
time.
it doesn't mean... What do you mean? What did I say the last time?
Just listen to it on the recording.
I will. Apparently I said something funny again. I mean, as I said before, I usually don't talk English in my normal life. Because I'm from and in Germany. Maddie is from and in England. So it just makes sense that we record this in English because my English is fine, I think. And most of you guys speak or at least understand English. And I can't get her to speak German to me, even if she can speak German. Anyway, should we address the elephant in the room or start
Which one?
with... well, both of us, if you are actually one of the few persons who has seen my videos on YouTube before, you know that I'm a bit of what you call a social justice warrior. Or SJW, or in Germany, a Gutmensch. Maddie is even worse than me, I think. Maddie is actually a full-on feminist. And there is a lot of stuff going on in this movie which parodies people like us. And in one case, which we will get to later, it goes a bit too far in my opinion and can actually be considered hateful. The main joke that they make about people like us is something that I sadly have to agree with, is that there is a lot of division in the SJW circles.
Yes. I mean, there's a running joke about activist groups claiming to put forward ideas all the time and making their intellectual speeches and everything, but not actually getting out there and translating that into action.
I mean, what they are saying isn't fighting the right enemy,
Yes.
but fighting possible allies. Because in the movie, you know what I just realized? We didn't, for the people who for some reason haven't watched the movie yet and didn't quit listening when I told them to quit listening and watch the movie and come back later.
There's not much I can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of need to go back and set the scene of the movie to actually make people understand what we are talking about. So, for all the people who don't know the life of Brian yet for some reason, I don't know if you guys exist. What have you done with your life so far? It's a movie which parodies movies about the life of Christ, while not being really a parody of any specific movie. It's just a parody of Bible and especially Jesus movies as a whole. It takes place in the times and the place where Jesus lived, but Jesus only appears in 2 scenes basically. One in his birth and one when he's preaching on the Mount. Both times he is a background character and the main character is
Who
Brian,
isn't
who's a
Jesus, but
guy
he's
who
kind of
who
loosely based on Jesus in a way.
I wouldn't even say that. Well, he has a few similarities with Jesus. One is a big spoiler, and the other isn't. The other, well, 3 similarities. He was
Mm.
born next to Jesus. He had some followers. And the last, spoiler warning, at the end of the movie he gets crucified.
Yes,
But other than that, he's
but there's one.
not as Jesus-y as
Well,
people think, I think.
there's one main thing which I could probably relate to the story of Jesus, which I will get onto when we actually start discussing the religious aspect.
Alright, so
Yeah.
now that we introduced the movie, let's get back to the Popular Front of Judea. Oh, what are they called?
People's Front of Judea.
I keep confusing the group. What?
People's Front of Judea.
The Popular Front of Judea is the one old guy, right?
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite jokes in the movie. Where's the Popular Front of Judea?
And there's the
There,
other
he's
one.
over there.
Whatever the other one were called.
Yeah. And yeah, I basically just explained we kind of explained the joke that we actually agree with about SJWs, which is that people like us don't really fight the real enemy, which in our case would be a system based on. What would you say our system is based on that we are fighting?
That's a very, very broad question.
Well, an unfair system, let's just say fighting an unfair system in our case, or fighting the Romans in their case. But instead, they are kind of just infighting. And I think that there's actually some truth to that.
I suppose there is the infighting, but I'd say another problem I identified, which also comes up, is that you'll see a lot of people speaking about, be it online, be it in person, about what they dislike in our society, what they want to see happen, but well, not so much the latter, actually. Mostly what's wrong with society, and they have perfectly valid points,
Yeah.
but aren't actually taking all of the action they could.
I think that describes me fairly well, sadly.
I mean, yeah, there's the issue of most people not having a means to do anything.
But also that there might be a problem with can't someone else do it? What am I to?
Yeah,
Why?
that's true. A lot of people might feel inadequate, I guess, or why would anyone listen to me?
Which is actually reflected by the title of this podcast. And do you think that just addressing problems is enough sometimes? That making people aware of them?
So, for instance, bringing up the discussion to raise awareness.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say it depends on how widely covered the issue is and how deeply developed the raising of awareness actually is. So if someone were to pick a widely covered issue and just point it out again,
Yeah.
that's not going to do much.
but if they address an issue which hasn't been
Then
covered as
yes.
much before, or introduce it to a group of people who don't know about it yet,
Yes. Or pick a widely covered
then
issue and expand into kind of more original thoughts on it. Or
which I
propose a
think is the
solution.
part which is hardest to do, especially the last thing. I think we, in this podcast going forward, not just this episode, we will just point out a lot of problems which we don't know the solution for, I fear.
We'll get there.
And so maybe we'll get there. And if we point out a problem that you have a solution for, feel free to tell us.
Sure.
And which is more likely, if we describe a problem which you don't think is a problem, feel free to insult us in the comments. Which is the more likely thing to happen, especially when we come back to the political aspects of Life of Brian, or even the religious aspects of Life of Brian, because the movie is most famous not for being funny, but for religious people hating it. When the movie came out, it was actually
You
picketed
showed
by
me that.
nuns.
Oh no, that was another thing, wasn't it?
I think it was. One member of the Pythons was very amused about nuns with picket signs, and in other areas there were also rabbis protesting against the movie.
It was mostly protest from a Christian perspective, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you know what the rabbis were against?
I could probably make a guess, but what were they against?
First, makes a guess, because what they were against is kind of funny to me. Because there is a lot of stuff that you could be angry about as someone who is a serious Jew.
Was
But what
it
the rabbis
was it that they felt that the how the Romans treated the Jews at the time was being trivialized?
no,
I could
which would be
understand.
something that would make sense, I guess. No, they were angry about the that John Cleese in the stoning scene is wearing a rabbi outfit. And they said you can't really put on this outfit if you aren't an actual rabbi.
I didn't actually know that that was a religious law or anything.
I didn't either. But
But
you
no, I
know,
can't get that.
that is raising awareness.
Yeah,
That is, even if I think it's kind of weird to get angry about something like that,
it
what
could
they
be a big
did
deal to
is
them.
raise
Yeah.
awareness. I learned something new and I thought about it and I just
I mean,
dismissed it. But
although that might seem like a strange concept to people who aren't familiar with the religion, I suppose it's still kind of a crappy thing for them to do, to portray a certain religious groups without actually reading up on their customs.
I think they actually read up on them a lot because if you
What and
look
and
into the
possibly just
movie,
missed that part.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although I think they're why I don't think that they make any sense with their protest is there is a difference in John Cleese. There is a different to me at least. You can see it completely different if you want to.
Yeah.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the audience.
All right.
But how? I'm also talking to you, but I think you will agree
All
with me,
right.
which
Fuck
is
you
why
too.
I said I think you will agree with what I'm saying. If you don't, just tell me. Which is there's a difference in John Cleese dressing up as a rabbi for a movie, and me just going out in that outfit. I think it would be okay if I did it, but it would be okay if he does it for a work of art, or even if I do it for a work of art. Because in that scene, he isn't John Cleese. He's some priest attending a stoning.
I see what you mean.
Would you agree with
I
that?
see what you mean. I think this would have been far less of an issue than it is now, especially as they were working with their group rather than casting other actors and things. But let's say it wasn't a Monty Python movie, and this is slightly irrelevant, but in films where they're casting random actors or doing a work of art, there could be a bit of an issue with just picking some white guy to play pretty much anyone
Middle
else.
Eastern
Yeah.
people. Because I don't know if this is new to anyone. Jesus and his disciples and anyone else living in that area at the time wasn't a white guy. Most of what we think Jesus looked like comes from later art. And when people portray scenes from the Bible, they mostly portray it as if it happened with the people who they know. One of the most famous images of Jesus is probably the Last Supper by Da Vinci, which doesn't include Middle Eastern people because probably he knew what Middle Eastern people look like, but they probably looked abnormal to him, so he just decided to draw a bunch of Renaissance Italian guys sitting around a table. Well, sitting on one side of the table, but
On the plus side, though, I get that the cast is pretty much made up of white people, and I'm glad they didn't do anything like painting their faces or putting on accents.
yeah, everyone in this movie pretty much speaks very British English with some Yiddish words thrown in there, which makes sense, I
Yes.
guess. One thing I did look up before we started this is the actual. I don't know how I missed looking that up, but I didn't look up the religious affiliations of the Pythons. Do you have any info on that?
I'm actually not too sure. I think the majority are loosely Christian or not religious at all, but
I thought so,
could
but
be wrong.
now I just thought, well, maybe one of them is actually Jewish. That
Possibly.
could be the case. Although it doesn't really matter, I think. Yeah, but back to the, what are they called? Not the
Well,
popular front of
if any
Judea,
of them
but
were Jewish, they probably wouldn't have had the rabbi costume in there.
I mean, if anyone is actually a serious Jew and is listening to that, please tell us if
Yeah.
you are offended by the John Cleese in a rabbi costume scene, because I'm fairly interested in that. So, should we address the elephant in the room with the... Well, they're not the popular front of Judea. I actually haven't seen the movie in English in a while, so I don't know what the original of the Volksfront von Judea is.
Which
What is the
elephant
the
in the
group
room?
that the trans people issue,
Ah,
which
yes.
is the biggest elephant in
Yes,
the room?
that's true.
I say elephant in the room because nobody ever talks about it. The last time I saw that movie, I watched it with a friend of mine who hasn't seen it before, who is a trans man. That means he was born as a girl but considers himself a guy. For all the people who, for some reason, don't know. And in this movie, there is a character who
The way you
is
put
played.
that,
I know that we are both
you
fairly.
you just did that
I know.
person doing a brief explanation of what they think being trans means. A lot of people would
Can you put it in a less?
actually argue that he wasn't born a girl or was ever a girl for that matter.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends on the individual's experience as to whether they knew they were trans from an early age or I don't know. It's probably not something I should be trying to explain, but you see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, that is why I just did it as briefly as I could to then move on to.
You still fucked up.
I know, I know I would. Uh, so there is a person in this movie played by a guy, which I assume to be a guy who is fairly happy with his gender, playing a character who comes out as being a woman, basically. And it's completely played as a joke. And I never considered that a problem before just when that scene comes on and I actually had a trans person sitting next to me. That was a weird experience because I never considered it to be problematic at all. And when I watched it, it was just like, holy shit, why didn't I consider this before putting this movie on?
I mean, before we even get to that part, when I first saw that scene, I didn't see it coming because every time one of the characters used a gendered term referring to men, the trans woman would come in with, for example, and women,
Yeah.
and I didn't see the coming out happening after that, and I just find it strange how unless somebody was actually trans or well trans or cis female, why
Let me
is
stop you right there. For everyone who doesn't know, cis is the opposite of trans, and is for anyone who wants to complain, it's an actual scientific term. Look it the fuck up.
yeah, and I
Carry
was
on.
I was saying, why is it considered so absurd for anyone of any other gender to care about including women? When she then says, I
Well,
want to be a woman, that, in response to why are you going on about women or whatever it was to that effect.
so you are saying maybe the movie is saying when the movie uses a man caring about women, well, basically a man being a feminist, as build up for a man coming out as a trans woman.
Yes.
Holy shit! I never really considered it from that perspective. Which I think, by the way, that they weren't thinking about trans people at all when they
No,
did
it
this.
it was played for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
That whole scene was.
Well, the whole movie is.
And
But
also, when she says, I want to be a woman, I want to have babies.
yeah, which is just making the scene absurd.
Firstly, I don't know whether I'm being pedantic about this, but yeah, of course, because having babies is the be all and end all of being a woman, of course.
You are not being pedantic about this, I don't
No.
think.
And also, clearly, whoever wrote that scene doesn't know jack shit about the experience of being trans. Really? To say that everyone chooses to, well, not chooses to transition, but comes out to people as trans or accepts his identity because they want to have babies.
Yeah, that is.
Like, maybe that's true for some people, but does that really have to be put at the core of the female experience.
That is for you to say, I think. I don't think I can say much to that.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't look this up again because I didn't rewatch the movie because I had other shit to do yesterday, doing other research, for example, and working. And what I remember is it true that the name she chooses as her female name is Loretta?
Yes.
Or do you get what that is a reference to? Well, I don't know if it's a reference to that, but I think it may be a reference to the Beatles song Get Back.
I didn't make that connection.
I made that the last time I've seen that movie.
For those who don't know the song,
there is the second verse of the Beatles song Get Back is sweet Loretta Martin thought she was a woman, but she was another man. All the girls around her said she's got it coming, but she gets it while she can. And then the refrain, or chorus as you say, get back, get back, get back to where you once belonged. Which you can't see it right now because we're just audio recording, but Maddie is making a bit of a disgusted face right now because I think this is also the first time she's ever seen that this verse in this.
I know of the song, but I haven't listened to it in a long time. Don't really know the lyrics. On hearing that,
Yeah.
it's a shitty thing to say either way. I'm not sure whether it's trying to point out the identity of a trans woman and claim that that's not valid, or whether it's talking about a cisgender woman and saying that she's acting too much like how they perceive a man should act.
Well, it's not either of those, but it
Either
can
way.
be read as both.
Either way, fuck
can
that.
Can I tell you what it's actually about?
Sure.
It's about the son of George Martin, not the writer, but the producer of the Beatles. His son coming to the studio in drag as a joke. So it doesn't have
it's
anything
nowhere
to do
near
with
as
trans
deep
people.
as it sounds.
No, it's just they were really having an in-joke. By the way, when the Cirque du Soleil did their Beatles show, they included Get Back, but cut out the second verse for the remix. I actually haven't seen the show, for obvious reasons. I am not very rich, and I can't just fly to Vegas to see a circus show. But I've listened to the soundtrack, and it's really good. If you haven't listened already, it's just called Laugh, I think. Give it a listen if you want to. There's a version of Get Back without this shitty verse on it. And with a cool drum solo in the beginning. Yeah, I think that the Loretta in Life of Brian is a reference to this verse.
Maybe.
I mean, the movie is like...
it's quite an
10
obscure
years younger
name,
than this song.
so I can't think of anywhere else.
Also, there is actually... Do you know about that? That there is actually a Beatle in the movie.
At what point?
I don't remember at what point, but in one scene, when people are sitting around, there is George Harrison. Basically,
as an extra.
Just in as an extra, yeah. He just kind of sits around there, and because he looks kind of Jesus-y anyway. I think George Harrison looks even more Jesus-y than I do. They just kind of put a head and a rope on him and let him sit there. Talking about mass scenes, should we transition to I just said transition after this topic. Should we transition to talking about the
I had one more point about some of the
all
jokes
right,
that go
then we'll
too
move on to the
far,
politics later.
which is at the beginning, where Brian's mother is trying to explain to him that his father was in fact a Roman.
Yeah.
There was one joke that actually kind of disgusted me, where
Which one
when
is that?
he asks her if she was raped, and she says, "Well, yes, at first."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
What do you mean at first? If it began as rape, it ended as rape. There's no if or but about it.
I completely agree. And I'm kind of weirded out that I didn't think about this before. I really dislike the whole scene, which is, I think, my only real criticism of the movie. Well, the only thing I don't like it for is this scene. I think that
It's a
all the
great movie.
transpeter stuff
That one,
is kind of problematic, but it's still funny. This scene as a whole is just not funny to me.
it's right at the beginning. Honestly, I
Yeah.
would have found the whole film much funnier if it hadn't been for that scene. It's the kind of joke that
Because
just ruins everything. If
because
it
it
can
kind of
cause
puts
a joke.
everything else in a different light.
Yes.
Well, they apparently cut some scenes and they didn't cut this, which I don't understand. They actually lost scenes of this movie. If
They let
anyone has
this one
them,
in.
please send them to us. Before we get into the more political side of things, were you as surprised as I always am when I watch this movie about the Star Wars scene?
Is that to me or to the audience?
No, to you.
Ah, yes. I mean, even when I watched it all the times after the first time, it still kind of trips me out.
This movie, by the way, is older than The Empire Strikes Back. So at the time when this came out, there was only one Star Wars movie in existence. And this is clearly a Star Wars reference.
I
The
still
setup
love
is the exact same setup as the cockpit of the
I love
Falcon.
the fact that they couldn't think of a way to get him from one place to the next without getting caught, so they just added in the Star Wars acid sequence for comedy value.
Which is just amazing.
His facial expressions, though.
And also the aliens.
They were kind of cute in a disgusting way.
They were.
They look like they'd be sticky if you touched them. I'm not saying that's cute, I'm saying that's gross.
But the design of them is cute.
It is.
Do you think that they included a Star Wars scene because a lot of especially of the first Star Wars movie, has a kind of Bible movie vibe to it? Because, I mean, Tatooine kind of looks like where they
That's
are
like-
shooting.
High thoughts. That never crossed my mind.
What didn't cross your mind? That Star Wars is kind of Bible
No,
movie-like?
that's
Or that...
why they added it in.
Because this movie is not much newer than the first Star Wars movie. They probably saw Star Wars while working on this movie. So, should we move on to the political stuff? The other political stuff. Or do you have any last points on the gender aspects and shit?
One from this ties in with the political aspect, but kind of near the end
Yeah?
when what's her face, Judith comes into the meeting saying that Brian's about to be crucified, and she's trying to
Yeah.
get everyone to get off their asses and go and help him.
Yes?
And someone makes a disparaging comment about feminists and then they eventually decide to get up, and then when he's actually being crucified, they just come and do a martyrdom speech and fuck off again.
I actually think that's really funny.
It
I
is,
actually
no,
have
it is really funny. I think, could that have possibly been kind of a more progressive point when that kind of shows them not taking something a woman is saying seriously?
I think it's another point of those kind of
Yeah.
people not getting off their asses, but just
I think
talking instead of
there's
doing.
that as well.
But I've never considered it from your
That they're
perspective.
just
I'm not sure if they put that in there because they wanted to say that, or if they just put it in there and you think it's like that. I don't think it matters. There's something like that in there, which is food for thought, which is what art is.
I think that was quite clear to me that they were doing that at that point simply because of the comments they made after she ran off to go and find him.
Oh, one last thing, which we forgot to say about the whole Loretta thing, is that apparently the Pythons realized that it was a shitty thing to do and kind of apologized for it in a joke in their, I think it is their next movie, The Meaning of Life, in which a woman who's giving birth asks for the gender, or, well, the sex of her baby, and the doctor tells her that it's a bit early to start with all the gender roles. Which is a great joke on its own and a great commentary, also food for thoughts. But to me, it kind of sounds like apologizing for that joke in Love of Brian.
I'm not sure if it directly apologizes for that, because it doesn't really tackle the issue of sex versus gender identity so much, but it does kind of touch on how the first thing anyone wants to know about their child, well, still today in society, with exceptions, is, again, I'm not saying all people do this, but many people just want to find out the biological sex of their child and then go on to breathing gender norms and socialization down their necks as soon as possible and ingrain it as deeply as possible into them. So it kind of brings up the absurdity of that.
And I think now we ruined the Monty Pythons for a lot of people because we pointed out that the Pythons are or were or whatever kind of SJWs themselves at times. Which I think is great, but I'm not sure if everyone agrees with me.
I'd say there are many things they've said and done that could go for or against that point. Obviously, bearing in mind they're a group of people who will have different opinions from each other.
And also they are artists and not politicians. And art is messy, which is something that we will come back to.
I had a point about that
in the next episode. But for now,
I actually had one thing to say about that, which is that sometimes it's difficult to tell what's satire and what isn't.
How do you mean? And can you give an example?
As in, with the point you're making about some of the problematic jokes here, it's hard to tell what's making fun of the social attitude that's being presented and what's in consensus with it.
Isn't that for the audience to decide?
Possibly, and I know Monty Python didn't do this, but a lot of the time when it's not made clear, whoever made the joke gets all pissed off when people find it difficult to tell.
Yeah.
And that kind of annoys me.
I don't know if the Pythons did that or not, but it annoys me when someone does it. It especially annoys me when someone does it who I actually like.
Yep.
Because then I'm disappointed.
And like, sorry, but if you've made an ambiguously shitty joke and then pass it off as, oh, it was just satire, that kind of sounds a bit disingenuous. And then to start getting angry about how people interpreted the joke, does that necessarily make the audience stupid, or does it just mean there was some very shitty delivery going on?
Well, that is a case-by-case thing.
Yeah.
It can be both.
I suppose, but I mean, if you've made a nasty joke and then you're saying, oh yeah, well, I wasn't intending to show that viewpoint. Shall we move on to the religious points, unless you have...
I was actually wanting to talk about the scene in which a lot of people follow Brian to his home because they think he's the Messiah, when in fact, according to his mother, he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. And they all stand in front of his window, and he tells them to basically bugger off because they are all individuals. And they all say...
The individualism. Yes.
And they all loudly agree with, yes, we are all individuals.
There are 2 instances of irony in that, I'd say. One was the obvious.
And one person says, I'm not, which is the second one.
Yes, one was the obvious, which is them kind of repeating a speech on individualism and individuality in a cult-like fashion. And the other was obviously somebody claiming
that he was not an individual and he's the only person who's doing that.
Yeah, and he's the only one who's making an individual decision, and then the whole group basically tells him to shut the fuck up.
It fucked me up when I first watched this scene.
Many levels of irony.
It's wonderfully written, and it's just... I think that is the deepest thing I've ever seen in any movie. And it's not even like some art house shit. It's a mainstream comedy.
A Monty Python comedy, no less.
I mean, Monty Pythons are the most philosophical of the mainstream comics.
I guess their work is very profound, but it's kind of got an easily digestible delivery, so to speak. I have one completely irrelevant point about that scene.
There is no irrelevant point.
You know when it's Judith, isn't it? She comes out of the bedroom, basically naked. Why is it that he shows everyone his dick? Now, even her boobs are considered so scandalous and so offensive that she had to have them strategically covered up by her hair in a most cringeworthy fashion. Oh no, God forbid we see a female nipple. The whole world's gonna blow up.
I actually do that too. When I'm topless, I strategically cover up my nipples because I had surgery done on my breast, and that is why I don't really like how one of my nipples look, and so I cover that up by hair as well.
Is it the left one?
Yes, it's the left one. And so I don't consider that weird.
No, but what I'm trying to say is, I understand that that's a personal decision, not trying to be patronizing. But my point is, I know you weren't trying to say this, but it kind of sounds like when you bring up double standards in body censorship, and then some woman chimes in with, I don't want the world to see my boobs. So, well, okay, good for you.
No,
that's a personal choice.
Sorry, you got what I was actually trying to say. To anyone else who's listening in, I was trying to say I didn't make that connection yet because I do the same thing, and that is why I don't consider it weird. What Maddie brings up is actually a good point. I just hadn't considered it before.
But what I'm saying is, the point isn't that everyone would suddenly be obliged to show something they don't want to. What I'm trying to say is it's about choice. And at present, we have that anyone with what's considered a male body is allowed to do this, whereas others are not. Why? There is no logic behind it. In fact, I don't think there's any logic behind censorship of the human body at all. I mean, it's quite pathetic, come to think of it. Everything such as jokes about abuse, glorification of rape, violence, is accepted as free speech. But obviously, it doesn't matter about the free speech of anyone who doesn't agree with it. On the other hand, something that all of us have, the human body is, at least in parts,
In huge
in
parts.
huge parts,
For some
considered
people in huge
one of
parts.
the considered taboo. What?
And it's a fairly new thing,
Yes.
actually. And not even in all cultures. It's weird.
It's not, yeah. It's something that's pretty much based in Western culture, I'd say. Well, not wholly, but it's present in Western culture.
It is present in Western
Yet,
culture.
large proportions of European and North American culture also like to try and put forward the false notion that they're not repressed, but everyone else is.
I mean, there's really no difference in covering up a woman's hair and covering up a woman's breast.
That's what I'm saying.
honestly.
So when the West complains about cultures where some people choose to, from their own personal religious beliefs, dress a certain way, well, isn't that hypocritical, considering we have laws about how a woman can and can't dress ingrained into the laws, at least in the UK?
I think we have that in Germany as well, but I'm not sure. I think that that just walking down the streets topless as a woman would be illegal, but I'm not sure. Maybe just try it the next time you are in Germany and see if you get arrested.
I will. Oh, that also brings me up to the scene with the crucifixion, where there's one woman there, and
Yeah.
she's also wearing like this red dress, when everyone else is wearing a white loincloth, except for one guy who seems to be wearing some kind of top as well. In both the instances, with the guy, they were covering him up, I think, because he was chubby, which is
Also
a
kinda
problem in
weird.
itself with body shaming. Yeah. That if you have a certain body type, it shouldn't be seen or shit like that. That's what it looked like to me.
In his case, it could also be like a personal choice that he wouldn't want to be naked on screen.
Maybe.
But that still would be a problem.
It still seems
but
a little bit weird. As
it
in,
does.
it
It's
can't be-
weird.
it can't be a
It's
coincidence.
weird and wrong either
it
way.
can't be a coincidence that the only person that would be considered overweight there is the one who's been covered up.
Yeah.
And also, the woman gets this red dress when everyone else gets a white loincloth, which is on one hand saying that she should be covered up, it covers her chest and everything, the same problem again. And also, even when she's being crucified, she has to look attractive, right?
And I don't think that there is anything that is attractive about crucifixion,
Nope.
because crucifixion is one of the two cases, the other one being rape, in which you can get nailed without it being sexy at all. Ladies and gentlemen, the worst joke of the podcast.
Can I punch you in the face?
No, you can't, because you
Oh,
are
shit.
in this weird little island and I'm in Europe.
The next time we meet, I will keep a record of that and I'll punch you in the face.
Was it really that bad?
Yes. What I was trying to say is, why is it that the others can actually look like they're about to be crucified, but she has to still be aesthetically pleasing?
Picture that in universe, by the way. How she would have gotten out there in a dress, because...
Although, that shitty joke you made brings me on to another thing. Which is, I mentioned the rape joke at the beginning of the movie.
Yes.
I've heard this argument so many times when I say that I don't find those funny at all. And they say, oh, if you can joke about murder and you can joke about, I don't know, beating someone up, why can't rape jokes be funny? And my answer to that, as it's such a widely asked question, would be that Can you think of any crime other than rape that cannot, or any crime of a sexual nature, or any crime of a non-sexual nature that can't be justified ever?
It's really a good point, and as I said before,
I
I'm
think
gonna
you brought.
steal
Yeah,
that
I
point.
think you brought that up. Which
Did
one
I
of us?
think of that?
Which one of us brought that up? I think we
I'm gonna
discussed
take
that
credit
once.
for it.
Fuck you.
I'm just gonna take
Fuck
credit for it
you.
because it's a
Fuck
really,
you.
really, really good point.
Rape can never be justified. However, I think there are very few but still existing situations where killing someone can be.
This is why I'm not sure whether I made that point or not. I'm actually
I
not
probably
certain
made that
if
point.
it can. Yeah, because you're obviously the more dangerous of the two of us.
But let's say
I know it doesn't look like this, people, but she is. I'm completely genuine about this.
I actually wanted to bring up one thing on the religious side,
Yeah, which
is, I mentioned early on that there were many aspects in which I could kind of identify Brian with Jesus, and one of them that he was trying to do some things in the way of activism, but wasn't actually looking for people to form this cult-like following and run after him. I'm not saying religion is necessarily a cult-like following, by the way. I'm saying
it isn't
the way it can be.
In the Gospel of John, it kind of seems that at times people are following Jesus without him actually wanting them to.
Yes, or
the book of John literally starts where it starts with, in the beginning there was the word and all this stuff, but after that it kind of is about people telling each other about Jesus and then following Jesus without him being involved at all. It's really weird to read. Go read the beginning of the book of John. It's actually kind of hilarious how little Jesus actually does to get the following.
Yes, and I think it kind of shows something, and also the way what Jesus supposedly said has been interpreted in many ways. It kind of shows in the film that some would argue that this is human nature, others would argue that it's a product of socialization. When people start blindly following somebody, some of them come up with their own interpretations of it, and they just start following that word. So in one way, kind of blindly running after one person whilst at the same time not listening to a word they're saying, but hearing what they want to hear out of it.
Isn't this the whole religion that well, I'm a part of, basically? Because Jesus didn't write anything down himself.
No.
So it's not even like with Islam, where at least the person who started it actually wrote something down. It's just the word of the person I am following being written down decades later, then translated into the language I'm speaking, and then being interpreted by me. I mean, it's kind of weird when you think about it.
Obviously.
And the New Testament wasn't even written in the same language that
the writing
Jesus
of
spoke.
religious texts it's written by humans and completely subject to interpretation.
Like all right.
Yes. But at the same time, this is, I think, how religion can why religion can so easily be used as a tool to control.
I think that it's actually not a bad thing completely, because people can get along when they have the same religion, and religion is often used as a tool of unifying people,
but
instead of like how the Bible actually has some like Greek mythology stuff in it to get the Greeks integrated into the religion.
What I'm trying to say is whoever is propagating the religion, whatever religion it may be, and putting it forward, be it the writer, be it someone in a position of authority, they could decide that they don't like a group of people and use religion to condemn and persecute them. And
You
that
are
just
thinking about the same thing I'm thinking about, I assume? The book of Leviticus and gay people?
yes, also
Which is probably the most famous example of that.
also Paul and the Corinthians on women, for example, and again on gay people. And then not long ago in human history, people in Europe and North America, after it was colonized, trying to manipulate religious writing to justify racism and slavery. Attempt to justify and fail in doing so.
To me, is one of the most horrible ways
Yeah.
to twist the teaching of Jesus. Because to me, making, even if you don't believe that Jesus is in fact the Son of God in some way, one thing that is clear is that Jesus of Nazareth belonged to a suppressed group and was a kind of freedom fighter.
Yes.
Jesus was one of the original peaceful protesters against prosecution and, well, against racism, honestly. And it's so horrible to me that people twist his words into the complete fucking opposite.
I mean, I'm not a Christian myself, but I get what you mean about unification, but do you think trying to bring a group of people together by making them all have the same values, particularly religious values, developed on something that's completely interpreted and no one knows the truth about, is really the way to go forward? Do the risks really make that approach worth it?
I'm not sure if it's worth it.
I honestly think people should be allowed to follow whatever religion they want, but I don't agree with a set of laws or government being based on religion.
I don't either. That is a completely baffling idea to me, especially.
I'm not
if
strawmanning you. I know
really...
that's not what you were saying. I'm just bringing that up as an additional point.
I mean, look at all the people who trying to implement biblical law into modern law.
It can happen with any religion.
Yeah, right now I'm actually breaking biblical law.
How so?
I'm wearing different sets of cloth at the same time, which is breaking the same code of rules which having gay sex is. So if you are against having gay sex, that is not to you, I know that you aren't against having gay sex, obviously. Yeah, that is in there as well, in the same fucking book of the Bible. Look it up. And then either start wearing only one kind of cloth at a time or stop complaining about gay sex, you weird hypocrite.
I think that might just have been the mildest way you could have put that. You weird hypocrite.
The next episode will probably be up in a week from now. A week from now we will talk about Mad Max Fury Road. If you haven't seen it before, do give it a watch. It's a really excellent movie and you don't need to have seen the previous 3 movies.
It works as a standalone movie as well.
It works.
It does.
And from what I haven't seen the other movies as well. Well, I've started with this.
If you haven't seen it before next week's podcast, I recommend go and see it.
And until then, always look on the bright side of life.